signals and line screen lines at 12, 12, 12, in position 12 cycles in set position. Travel point lines of graph. 3 triangulation, lines of box in set position. All right. Then we get position lines of swirl, screen lines adaptation, process calculation lines into question. That puts all communication grounds. All right. Grounding lines of 1 into 2 lines of 3 track location and setting. Set course centers line 1, 2, 6 lines, 8 platforms and travel. All right. Directing course centers into line screen adaptation and surface and travel. It says communication ground lines, flux capacitor over line direct signals into combustion over line, incognito, and track location. Directing modification ground centers 1, position of 2 settings and travel. Set course centers line direct signals into 144 platform. Synchronize the setting in line communication of the filter line. Setting lines of box lines in a 12-line sequence and panel. Operation surface, operation travel. Okay, platforms of 1. Platforms cross line signals into 1 signal modification. Ground centers course center line communication setting. Swirl line directing signals of portals and communication lines of realms. Directing course centers into position level calculation lines of flux. Directing in signals and modification ground centers. Process lines of question. Now with the question line, screen lines adaptations to infinity 8 in rotation surface and travel. Change communication. Directing and modification. Right? Open up through sequence, line screen adaptation. Right? Process lines of 1, configuration of face recognition. Set course centers, line direct signals, purple oval line, box line screen. Directing signal locations into red line screen. Directing signals modification lines to green line screen. Course center lines, bring it in travel, and point lines of graph. Directing line symbolism, course center interference, in line communication setting to block over screen adaptation. Process core line setting in correlation lines of gold and sequence line screen. Directing in modification grounds, course center line calculation setting, back into blue and travel point lines of graph. Directing line symbolism, line screen adaptation system to pink and travel endpoint lines of setting. Process lines of 1, open signals and position modification. All right. Now the signal lines, we're going to go through screen modification lines of screen adaptation. Process lines of 1, process lines of 2, 8. Okay. Now we switch line screen adaptation, bringing it through equation line screen adaptation. Process lines of signals and line correlated setting incognito. Process lines of setting, 1 signal, 1 position, 1 travel, 1 modification. Points line is setting high interference into blue over triangulation, over cross line, in cross communication system of filter line direct signals, all through calculation screen lines adaptation. Okay? Then we take it again, set lines of communication to box line, setting course centers in line screen lines adaptation system to ASCAR. Directing line screen adaptation setting, process lines of 1, change weather patterns and line signal modifications. Wipe out the screens, course centers line connection neuralize, indirect signals to modification. Center course system of travel. Point lines of graph communications. All right? Directing line signals, bring it out through equation and set position. Operation surface, operation position, and go into core line signal and line communication setting to travel. All right? Center core line, reline settings and travel point lines of graph. Center core system of 1, 2, 6, 8, 12, and 14 and travel. Directing lines of X8001 and position of the platforms over 3. Direct cargo lights and setting in signals in modification ground centers and operation surface. Center core system and Xbox, line centers of computer operation surface and travel. Setting communication grounds, over cross location on a 45 line angle. That communicates the ground centers, open all signals into modification grounds and set position to 1 set point line direction. Center course system, line condition setting, and travel and point lines system. Change communication, direction. Change communication, line signal. Open all signals, modification ground centers, line signal. Process calculation ground centers into I circle line screen, directing in position location to its intelligence. Set communication grounds over cross location, right? Set communication grounds over line signal cross location, right? Set communication lines of purple over line signal in 4 lines of traction locations. Directing in symbolism, cross lines of 4 settings. Communication ground line cycles, regenerate the communication screen, and communication lines in a 45 line angle and rotation surface and traction. Correlate the screen lines, adaptation lines of flux. And we add position lines of A track. Set of communication grounds, A lines of 1, set core centers. Setting core lines of B over C, over D, over E, and position lines of F. Let's get a track lines and line screen. Directing in modification center travel. Okay. Set communication grounds, set communications interference, inline signals. Spring communication system at travel. Okay, balance communication screen lines here. Change communications, opens all signals. Okay, so we got a V line rotation, travel point lines of graph. A signals, A line division, B line signals, set position of D, factors over E over traction. Directing lines of course center line condition setting into confirmation setting of 0 gravity. Platforms are 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 travel, 1 division. Okay, cross line condition energetic dome lines and bandwidths over line and direct signals modification. Ground center lines of 1 platitude line screen and 3 lines of cycles. Screen lines adaptation, right? Side course centers lines of all calc and modify into an X line 100 frame position lines of travel, directing in modification. Coursing centers and line direct signals in upswing in line communication to its position of its program. Directing in modification screen lines adaptation, process core centers, electrical line panels and direct signals in position location to its system all through travel. All right, so line screen adaptation, 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 traction, 1 division. Cross core centers, line condition setting to orange in line screen adaptation. Okay, setting communication ground lines, high center interference, red over signal and line communication. Process line is signal modification. Open through channel, all right? See how it glows? It's glowing, right? It's like a glow stick. All right, modification lines of 1 over traction, 1, 3, 6 over lines of 12. Okay, set core centers into, there we go, metric meters and scale. Then we go in position lines of vector over line, flux over screen, and direct signals modification. Set core centers lines 1, 2, 6 over 8, 12 security lines of panels and line position location to a system, all through tractions. That's direct signals, back and setting, operation surface and track location. Set core centers, lines of E frame, directing modification ground centers. Point lines of settings in all line position, right? XC1000 comes in line screen, adaptations of 1 surface, 1 traction, and 3 slight lines of communication, right? Core centers, flux over 1, in position over 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12 in set position. Sequence lines directing in modification ground centers, open signals, and 2 lines of parallels. Core centers line direct signals into modification green centers, 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 traction, 1 division. Core centers lines of V line screen, directing signals into core line settings of travel. Set core centers lines electrical line grids, location setting to its remembering cycle and traction R. Directing line signals, cross line symbols, and position location to its memory. Core centers line direct signals, modification cycle lines, and high center interference of travel. Direct lines computer framing, over cross location, right? Sets communication ground centers, operation surface. Retriangulate position of its program, directing in modification grounds, over cross line symbolism, in 1/3 ground lines, screen lines adaptation. Process lines of 1, process lines of 6, process lines of setting. Set core center, inline communication, the purple. Directing signal lines of 3 track location lines of setting and position. Process overcorrelation system, travel point lines of graph, directing inline communication to its setting. Communicate grounds, set core system and travel, point lines of graph, and communication lines of 0 and set position. Process communications over cross line condition setting to open sequence. Now, directing lines of communication is very location setting to position lines of panels. 4 panels and tractions and 4 red line cycles and travel. Directing cross line signals, line condition, and cross line communication. Directing line symbolism, cross lines of 1, cross lines of 2, cross lines of 3, laser lines, sky grid, sky panels, sky travels, sky lines, sky direct signal location to its calculation. Modification grounds over cross line communications and 1 line communication non-link. Setting core line settings and travel, point lines of setting, cloak and dagger, setting cross lines and signals into traffic flow and direct signal. Modification ground center line setting to XC1000 in a blue line cycle and travel and point lines of graph. Center core system, overline in line rotation, overline in track locations, and overline in division. Setting condition ground lines to track flow inventory ground center locations over cross line conditions of green. Set lines of 3 in position of 4, over track location of 4 lines of measure and scale communication to matrix. Directing lines of symbolism, core centers of travel. Directing modification of lines of 3 travel, correlates and setting in high position. Directing in modification grounds, open signals all modification ground centers and travel input lines of graph. Laser attractions, laser direct signals into modification. Laser track lines, highest interference, high position of its power. Directing modification lines, we go into cloak and dagger, center core system, travel point lines of graph, 3 lines of rotation, surface, and travel. Directing lines of 3 cycles, 4 lines of cycles, and 4 settings of travel. Directing in communication ground centers, cross location setting and symbolism. Setting communication lines of 1 in position of 3 over setting in cerebral cortex and design line in line condition setting to 144 incognito, taking all filter line direct signals into modification ground centers of 0. Directing in modification setting and a 45 line angle, directing in communication all levels of signals in high position. Travel point lines of graph, XT1000 comes in spot centers, 1 position of 2, 6, set core centers of 3, platitude dockings lines of 7 over setting communication ground centers, 1 setting, 1 traction, 1 division, 1 correlation, 1 line position. Set the mapping sequence lines of panel. Sets core centers to V sector, directing lines of signal. Core center line direct signals into modification ground centers. Allocate time frames in set position. Okay, intelligence formations. All right. Coming to core centers, lines of communication again. Coming in lines of adaptation to Asgard travel. Okay. Now, bringing in the light signal and travel in point lines of setting and rotates in surface, right? Sets lines of dimensional door lines. We allocate time frame and position over levels and track location of black centers and travel. Center core line settings, white line symbolism, 1 center in position over cross line. Calculate and modify, bring in line screen adaptation to processing communication to a system, all through traction, all division. Set calculation screen, directing in modification of 3 angles, and set position lines of 4 segregation lines of travel. Directing line screen adaptation system to green line cycles, 3 lines of communications into 1 center of travel. Calculate and modify in coloration lines of patterns and line conditions to 1 gold center and 3 track locations in system, all through calculation. Now, bringing that out through equation, we bring in line screen adaptations and a 40 line setting. The operation surface and travel in point lines of graph, centralize the communication system, all through set location. Okay? Now it's set up in travel. Now it's set sequence. So we're going to set position over here. Set position of graph over here. And set position. Set line communications. Bring it down and set position. And bring it in the center communication. And bring it over cross line, left line rotation. And communication grounds. Set correlation settings to travel and direct signals and modification system. All through calculation. All right, done by equation. All right. Center communication grounds, we allocate time frames. Okay, each time frame has a central line communications that opens all sequence into velvet and position lines of power, directing line signals into a box frame. Core center line condition setting, orange circles, set lines of 2 line rotation surface and travel, right? 3 center core line direct signals into green central systems and set position to its operation. Directing line calculation setting puts all levels, gold over line screen adaptations, process lines of 1, 2, 3, and set position of travel. Directing in modification, bring it out, and line screen adaptation, process the communication lines of direction. Calculate and modify, line screen adaptation, over cross lines of traffic flow and track location. Directing in modification lines, proceed with caution. Directing line set correlates and setting XT1000s coming in position in 3 cycles and track location. Directing lines of symbolism lines of planet surface puts lines of securing line defense lines. Process lines of 1, 2 over setting, over sequence, over panel, 1, 2, 3. Direct lines of signals and modification. Ground center lines of 1, open signals, cross line communications in panel. Traffic flow, direct connection time sequence puts all communication setting. Green set lines, all line communication interference, and line screen adaptations, process communication. Done by equation. Traffic is now in inventory line settings into 144 panel. Remember the sequence lines, the screen lines adaptation of force. Now we get a position lines of settings over green. Of course, centers on 1 cycle, 1 center, 1 travel, right? Directing in modification. Bring it out through equation. We're going to center line settings. Process lines of 1, process lines of 6 over 12. 12 line cycles and 1 center, 1 traction. Directing lines modification of flux over line screen into 1 surface In rotation surface and line conditions of 144 incognito. Directing lines of panel, line conditions of blue. Blue centers the lines of 1, 2, 6 over lines of 12 and 14 at travel. Directing in modification ground centers, we go through invisible chart waves. Directing lines of one symbol, one traction, one division, one location. That's my equation. Center core systems, setting calculation. Directing in modifications over cross line. Bring it up in signal. Set position location to right. Set position location to the left. Set position location down cross location. Set communications over line signal is set position. Center core lines is center. Set position location of center operation of setting. Set position location of the line set communication setting. High core centers, line travel, point lines of graph. Inline communication to a system through cognito. Point lines of graph, center core system of travel. Okay? Open through sequence, line screen adaptations to open panel and track location. Boom, open panel. 2 point lines of graph, center core systems of 2 panels, and track location. Directing lines of symbolism, cross line signals. 1 center, 1 travel, 3 points, set position operation. Travel point lines of graph into 2 lines of screen. Flux over 1 signal and position, operation service. Bring it out through equation, up line signals, bring it out line rotation, in set position, out calculations. Directing in modification lines, directing lines of communication system, X3000 here, X3000 here, X3000 here, X3000 here, and 4 panels of traction. Directing line core centers, cross lines of 1, cross lines of 2, cross lines of 8, and cross lines of 12, and set calculations. Directing line screen adaptation systems, platforms 1, platforms 8, and platforms 14 line screen adaptations in 1 measure, 1 scale. Communication grounds, set core system, all through travel, and mechanism lines, screen line adaptations of process communication. Set core system, location. Directing lines of 1, 2, and 3 panels of traction. Directing symbolism line screen adaptations in 3 vectors over screen. Directing in modification grounds, we bring in the orange line cycles, sets communication grounds, and 3 set core system and travel. Sets communication ground centers. Directing line symbolism, process line communications over line signal in modification. Center core system, core line centers into the moon line rotation, 1 center, 1 traction, 1 division. Cross lines over cross locations, 1 center, line position and travel. Sets communication ground centers, lines at orange line sequence and center position to its calculation. Cross line symbolism, open all green, 3, 4, 6, 8, and 12 set position location and filters. Directing line signals opens all signals into modification grounds. Now, remember the central system location setting? Process calculation in the line, bringing direct signals into track locations. Levels of travel and direct signals and modification. Ground center lines of 1, ground center lines of 2, and lines of green line and 3 line rotation. Point lines of graph, center core system of 3 travels. Directing bring line signals into modification ground centers at green line. Core centers line conditions setting to red line. And set position of center. Core center line conditions at gold line. And set position lines of setting. Process communication lines of sun, rotation surface into visibility line waves and track location. Directing lines of symbolism, cross line conditions at 1 center, 1 operation. Directing in positions all levels, point lines as centers into octahedrons, tetrahedrons, tesseract, and line screen adaptations of processing, process and modification lines of system. Communicate ground lines, wire indicators, line conditions of purple, 1 signal line, 1 signal 2, 1 signal 6, 8, 12, and 16, and set position of travel. Sets core lines, gravitational line screen adaptation lines of surface. Rotate the surface of ground lines in gravitational line screen adaptation to its processing. Allocate time frames, change communication setting, back and travel. Okay? That's setup and setting. Okay, mechanism grounds, formulas over equation. Let's go through all communication. Flux over 1, flux over setting. Okay, set position of 1. Lines, 4 lines, Fibonacci line screen adaptation. Y screens, 3 lines of 2, and we got 2 lines of 1, position of 0, and set correlation. Setting core center line and Fibonacci lines of flux over line and direct signals to console. Directing line symbolism, core center line can setting of gauges. Directing and modification lines of 3 weather panels and travel endpoint lines of graph. Set core centers line calculation setting. Set communication lines of grounds and center lines of 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1 set position. Travel point lines of graph, 0 setting, 1 cycle, 0, set position of 4 lines of cycles. Course center lines of 1 over lines of 0 over lines of 0 over lines of 0 over lines of 0, line position of travel. Set communication ground center line condition setting. Line directs signals into one center position to its location. All right? Now we switch it around in line screen adaptation. Process lines of 1, calculate, modify, 1 center, 2 0 lines of setting, 3 lines of 4, 6 over 1, 1 6 lines of high center interference of travel, point lines of setting. Process coordinate line settings into its measure of scale. Its communication grounds come into the primer circuits and travel in point lines of graph. Come into all communication system and travel. Okay, mind of modification, right? Course center lines of 1 in position over 2, over 6, over 8, over 12, over 16, over 24, 16 line settings, 7 position lines of travel in point lines of graph. Directing line symbolism, line course centers into truth, line condition setting into false, set core lines of truth in position of false, and set position to its operation. Directing core line centers into panels, cross line symbolism, lines of earth and space, and roots and rotors, and line rotation surface in a black hole and travel. Sets communication grounds, flip it around, and set position lines of travel. Points line setting, open all signals, and ground centers, lines of 1 cycle, 1 surface. Balance communication ground centers and coloration lines and security. Security lines of 1, 2, and 3 panels of communication traffic flow. Directing symbolism cross line communication setting of 4 lines of communication. Directing line signaling, highest interference into gold cycles, and position of proceed with caution. 4 settings and travel in point lines of set position. Set calculation. Now, directing lines of course interference, we go into the green. Now, green lines go, location of metric meters, 1 scale, 1 position, 1 travel, and 4 core line settings of travel. Sets communication ground centers, line communication setting into cloak and dagger. Directing lines of 1, okay, set position lines of travel, over cross location, indivisibility line screen, adaptations of flux over traffic, over inventory, into binary reline course centers of travel communication. That equation. It's all set up now, right? I know it's complicated, right? It's all set up now. All right. That's the traffic inventory flow. The direct signals to the binary course centers of travel. Setting communication ground centers, inline communication system. If you look really close, you can see the H line course centers of travel, headquarters. It's all set up, it's in travel. Headquarters, guys. H. See? Headquarters. All right? Okay. So symbolism lines of 1 setting opens all signals. Modificate the ground lines and rotation surface and travel. Points lines as heights interference in measure and scale communication. Now, directing lines of course centers, we take the line send locations to its traffic inventories in 4 settings. Set position lines of lines north, east, west, and south. That core lines of settings over 3 attractions in position lines of measure. Scales communication to its position location as travel. Now, in modification ground centers, we open up all communication lines into Fibonacci's. Fibonacci lines of 1, 2, and 4 panels of 6 location settings of travel. Directing in modification ground centers, line setting location system over cross location of screen lines adaptation. Process lines of C lines, 3 lines of communication. Directing lines of symbolism over cross line of 3 line communication. And direct lines of modification 1 center, 1 track location, right? Flipping lines anomaly, line communication settings, 17 lines of value. Set course centers, lines of highest interference and travel in point lines of graph indicates underscore. Directing line screen adaptation is an equal line core line center in travel. Directing lines course center, flip it up in line rotations, Y line screen adaptation lines of core system of lines of travel. Directing line communication system, all the line screen adaptation system, puts all levels of track location to its system location of balance. Balance communication lines of grounds, sets communications over here in travel, sets communications over here in setting, sets communication lines of center, operation, 5 trial location settings, leftover lines, right over communications, center positions, back contractions, and 145 split lines of anomaly and screen line adaptation. Process lines of 1, sets communications of red in set position. Process core lines correlation setting into levels of yellow, proceed with caution. Sets communication ground lines of green into go and track location. All done. Everything's done, right? So we got travel line, recognition time sequence. Now we overcross the screen lines adaptations to its measure and scale communications. Invisible line screens puts all communication system all through traction. Okay, your lights are now in traffic flow of inventory line setting location to its system. All through measure, all through scale. Okay, Directing lines of screen lines adaptation. Process lines of 1, process lines of 6, process lines of 8. Okay, changing communication lines of screens. All right. Bring in line screen adaptation. Process lines of setting. One system, travel point lines of 2 graphs. Okay. So you get a V-line screen, directing lines into 1 over screen, over cross locations, settings, and travel. In point lines of setting. Okay. Directing line screen adaptation to its position of V-line. Rotate the surface of the lines of the location system. Arrow points indication system of direction signals. Directing line symbolism, cross lines of 1, 2, 4 panels of security lines of measure and screen lines of adaptation. Cross lines of 3 lines of communication, security lines of panels, and 3 track locations in set position. Okay? All right, so that's all symbolism. That's done through equations. 4 box locations of 4 lines and a 3 triangulation. Okay? So that's communication lines of setting of 0, 1, and traction. It's all done now, right? Everything's at 0, 1. Symbolism lines, invisibility line screen, adaptation on service. We get a read track location to a system all through measure. Now we just wipe it out through screen. Sending communication grounds, open signals, open panels, mechanism lines of screen adaptation to a service, re-angle point line communication of traffic inventory, binary line condition setting to 0, 1. Take it area in the line communication of filter lines in out of cognito, directing in modification ground centers of travel, and communication system, all through calculation setting. Open all sequence, auto communications, all line signal in the modification. All right, that's what we're working with now. All right, and when you bring it in, you know exactly what you're coming into. Okay, it's really interesting, right? It creates its own system, creates its own platform. I didn't do that. It creates its own platform. Look at that. See it on all different angles. Look at that. Right? Look at this. Look at the angles. Look at that. How powerful that is. It creates its own system. All right, mechanism lines of screen lines adaptation of flux. Coloration lines is change. Directing in modification ground centers, process line, invisibility line screen. Directing lines, take it out through equation. All right? Done. All right? So you work on every angle and you bring it through equation through platform. Right? Platforms of setting, and travel. Right? Cross it out, cross it out, cross it out. Symbolism line screen adaptations of all line communication surface and travel endpoint lines of communication system of the calculation, right? So it sets lines of center and communications. Open all signals and travel lines of setting. Process lines of 1 and set position lines of calculation, right? All right, so we symbolism lines of attractions and direct signals into all line screen adaptation to a surface. Okay? So it's really interesting when you really look at things in a 4-line angle on set position. Right? It's incredible when you really start to connect. Right? Know exactly how you work with your incognitos, your locations, your visible chart waves, your direct signals, your modification line screen adaptation of surface and travel, all invisible in set position. It's all done. All right? All right, so that's it. So we're in this sequence of lines of screen now. Okay, everything is in a platform communication. Okay, everything, right? So now you just have to understand how to central line your settings and location system through 144 and trashes. All right? I know that's a lot that I just finished, but you have to truly understand how this all works now in Plateau and how it formulates your simulate system location to use yourself through all of your CPU and really recognize everything in communication is conscious and it's all levels of you through attraction. You just have to understand how to direct and redirect your signal location system. Everything is given to you through all lines of communications. Once you understand your mapping sequence, once you understand the conscious awareness of everything around you, everything comes to you through identification and settings. All right? See you in 5.